Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. To say that Michael Lensing is involved in our community is an understatement. He has lent his enthusiasm and commitment to a wide range of organizations and boards. As the president of Hospice Friends, president of the Iowa City Library Foundation, on the board of directors of Riverside Theater, board of directors of Mercy Hospital, the Salvation Army Advisory Board, United Action for Youth, board of iCare, Iowa City JC's Board of Directors, and many others. Michael is there offering his time and financial support. He believes that giving back to Iowa City is one of the most important things he does. In addition to his community involvements, Michael Lensing is a licensed funeral director at Lensing Funeral and Cremation Services. He is a member of many professional funeral organizations and sits on the board of directors of the Iowa Funeral Directors Association. Besides his city, statewide, and national involvement, Lensing Funeral Home provides community programming and various support groups for the bereaved. Born and raised in Iowa, a graduate of the University of Iowa, Michael is the father of one daughter and two sons. Welcome to One of a Kind. Wow, I don't know when you sleep, Michael.
I feel like I just had my obituary read.
No. No. This is your story.
Okay.
I read that you were born in 1952 in Independence, Iowa, but you were raised in Cedar Rapids.
Just my mother was in false labor, and they delivered in Independence.
In Independence.
My grandparents lived in that area.
Okay, so tell me a bit about your first family and their influence on you.
I have a sister, and my parents and my mother taught in Catholic grade schools for like 40 years in Cedar Rapids. My father was a salesman for Wilson and Company, so he would go on the road and would go to small town grocery stores, and so some days if we had a day off or something, I would ride along, and I think I found maybe a little bit of interest in anatomy. Sometimes we'd go to these home, the butcher shops.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the old-fashioned, meat markets. And so I'd see kind of all this stuff going on. So I had this fascination about science and anatomy and all this stuff. And my mom was very much into education. My sister is 3 years younger and lives in Marion. And so it was a very typical, I think, very family-oriented. My father is originally from Festina and had 10 brothers and sisters. So very large Catholic family. He has I have like 60 or 70 first cousins, of which I maybe know 5. I actually...
10 or 20?
Yes, it's like I'm at the older end of the group. And then on my other side, on my mother's side, there's only 6 of us, and 5 of us that are living, so grandchildren.
Now, is it true you really did take tap dancing lessons?
I tap danced for a long time. It was almost like a requirement.
In your family?
Yes, on my mother's side. There was like my mother, and there's like 3 or 4 aunts who were very lively, and they are all gone now, and I miss them dearly, but they were very colorful, and so it was almost like a requirement that all the children at about age 5 went to Irene Ilton in Cedar Rapids, and Irene was like an icon. She had, I will always remember, she was a great tap dancer. She had an organ. It was over on 3rd Avenue, and just tons of kids went to her. And you did tap and jazz ballet, and most of the cousins were girls, but it was like Jim, another cousin of mine, and I did this, and and loved it. And so I tap danced from about age 5 to about age 17.
Why did you give it up? Why did you hang your tap shoes up?
I just moved on. I did theater in high school. I loved theater, and when I was the other thing I did as a child was swam a lot. So I was in like swim teams and all this stuff. But I was very short. When I graduated from high school, I was 4'11". So in high school, 10th grade, I went out for swim team. But the coach, I remember saying to me, he said, Michael, you were so short. He said, I'm afraid to put you in competition because he said all the other guys are so much bigger.
But swimming shouldn't.
But swimming, but it all had to do with speed.
Okay.
And I know he was being conscientious about me, but it kind of frustrated me. So I decided to get involved in theater, and so I did a lot of plays, and I was short, so I could do, and I could sing pretty high at that time, and so I did played Patrick Dennis in Mame, and was Pappy Yoakum, and did all these different plays, and didn't really grow until after high school. Okay. So I kind of continued it on, and I still love to dance and that sort of thing.
Do you still? I was going to ask.
I don't tap dance.
You don't tap dance anymore.
But but it would be fun. I sometimes think of Adelaide Bugarelli, who tap danced till I think later in her years here in town, and I always think, well, maybe I could take that up
Look
again.
at Savvy and Glover
Yes,
on
you're
Broadway.
right. You're right.
I mean,
and it was, and I loved doing that. And actually, my thighs were much firmer, and swimming did that too. So, and my sister and I actually we would do. Kind of an act together, so we would do a brother-sister thing, and then our mothers would make all the costumes.
And you brought a picture which we'll show to the audience.
It was kind of like a big part of life.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, you almost didn't come to the, I know I mentioned you graduated from the University of Iowa. You almost didn't come here.
I wasn't going to come here. And actually, I'd been accepted at Upper Iowa University, and our next door neighbor in Cedar Rapids had been on the board, and his family was kind of real involved with that school. So a friend, my best friend from high school, and he didn't know what he wanted to do. And so I said to Jeff, I said, well, why don't you go to college? Why don't you go there with me? So we both enrolled, we both got accepted, and then about 4 weeks before classes, my father said to me, he said, you know what? He said, he had gone to Loras, and he says, you know what? He said, really, you should go to a big university. And I said, well, I don't really want to go to a big university. I want to go to a smaller. He said, well, I think you shouldn't. I don't even remember being in Iowa City much, maybe 2 or 3 times in my life. And I remember driving down here and liking it and enrolling and getting accepted. And then I had to tell my best friend, and he ended up going to Upper Iowa, graduating.
Oh.
And I ended up coming here and getting my degree in elementary education.
But you were flirting with... I
was in pre-med originally.
In pre-med, but
yes.
Because that anatomy was that
I really, and probably deep down, really wanted to be a pediatrician. And I think I would have been really good. But at that time, it was like, I lived in Hillcrest, and it was like, everybody, of course, it was before co-ed dorms, but it was like everybody on the floor was in pre-med. So it was like, it was really very competitive, and my mind, it tends to be more, I think as I've aged, probably more toward the creative bent than the scientific bent, or numbers are not my thing.
Okay, so chemistry
was like, oh my gosh. And actually a very funny story to say would be that to encourage anybody to move on, an instructor, Daryl Lyman, who still lives in Iowa City, and I think he maybe just retired from the university. I took chemistry from him, and I was a freshman. And I took it twice, and I flunked it. I did not, my mind is not, and it wasn't like I didn't study. And I remember going in to talk to Professor Eyman, and I said, I really did study. And I was at the verge of tears. And he looked at me and he said, I know, Michael. And he said, I'd give you a D, but he said, there's somebody above you and somebody below you. And I kind of huffed and left. And years later, we had his mother, I think his mother's funeral or something, and he says, you know what, you did fine. And it was very funny to look at.
It was a blessing that you did the right.
Yeah, some things you're meant to be, and
Exactly.
Chemistry was not my forte.
How did you get into the funeral business?
By fluke. I heard from a friend. I was real involved in a group called University Programming Service, a union board years ago at the union. And union board did like the thieves markets. We set up all the activities for the union. It was all student run. And so there was a friend, still don't remember her name, but a friend of a friend who said, oh, you know what? We were looking for an apartment. She goes, I have this friend who lives above this funeral home downtown. And at the downtown, it was across the street from the cottage, now a bar.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, 13 South Lane, next to the old First National or U.S. Bank drive-in, built to be the funeral home, in 1917. And so we went up there. Mr. Donahue was living and interviewed, and it was the last place on earth. I'd been to 2 funerals in my whole life, and it was a free apartment, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I'd do this. My parents were putting me through school. I thought, well, this would help. And so I went through the funeral home, and I went back to my dorm. I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. And this best friend I went with from high school, he ended up moving in. And I lived there 2 years. And the first year, it was the last thing I would have done. I mean, it wasn't that it was bad. It's just, it bothered me a lot. And it wasn't until I really started, we'd also work the door at visitations. And I think that's when I first realized that it's a lot more for the living than just for the dead. And it was like you met really wonderful people. And so the idea was to get my degree in elementary ed, which I did. And I student taught at Sabin years ago. And if it didn't work out, you know, then I go back to teaching. But it worked out. And I ended up living in Cedar Rapids for a year, working there for about 6 months, and then there was an opening back here, and I came back. And
Didn't you start quite young working for?
I ended up, I was graduating from college like 22, I think, 21 or 22. Ended up going to mortuary school in Indianapolis at the time, coming back, and then I ended up managing the firm when I was like 25. I was very young. And it was almost humorous.
Still located on Lynn Street?
On Lynn Street. Oh. And it was really kind of ironic because people would come in, you know, they'd look at me and you just knew they were going, you know, Vicki, my business partner, also ex-wife, her grandfather owned a drugstore.
I read that. I didn't know that was
and they would sometimes,
a funeral.
Yeah, they would go up to Charlie sometimes when Charlie was living and say, is he really old enough to do what he does? And you know, so it was interesting. But ended up buying the business at 26 or 27. But it was just kind of the right time at the right, you know.
But speaking of Mott, I always thought it was always had been a drugstore, but before
that, it was a funeral home. Yes.
That must have been what, at the late 1800s?
Yes, early 1900s. Yes. The original founder of the funeral home would have been Mr. Hohenschuh, who was very, at his time, like, helped found the National Funeral Directors Association. Very cutting edge gentleman. Had been helped design Iowa Avenue.
What was his name again?
William Hohenschuh, and did a lot of plays. He acted. They never had children. They had a beautiful home over on Jefferson Street, which is now torn down. But they never had children. He'd dress up. He went to Chicago and bought a red velvet costume for Santa and played the Elks Club Santa. Anyway. That would be Vicki's great uncle on her mother's side.
Okay.
And then her grandfather was Mr. Mott. And so the old Hohenschuh Funeral Home, originally, before it was a funeral home, was where the drugstore was.
Okay.
Which is ironic.
Yes, that she came into the business
yeah, and
too.
And when we started dating, it was very odd because it wasn't until after we started dating that
you found that connection.
Yeah, that connection. I mean, we knew it, or she knew it, but it, you know, bizarre.
Well, tell me, what do you do when you're dealing with sadness all day? What do you do because you're such an up person, and
some would say that. I think there's two sides to me, I'll be very honest. I think I am very up. I mean, I try to be very positive. On the other hand, there is definitely a part of me that's negative, and I don't think a lot of people see that. I mean, there is a part that my kids and Vicki and sometimes the staff, they know when I'm down, and I'm not. I'm a patient person with everybody else but me. I'm not a patient person with myself, and so when I expect things to be done, it's like, for instance, I just finished painting a room. I used to feel much more comfortable hiring it done because if it took them 4 days, I don't care. But I finally switched the idea, and I thought, you know, I'll paint the room, but I'm taking one wall at a time. So tonight I can do one wall. And it changed the perspective. So I think doing what I do, there's been two stages to it, I think, in my life. Early on, I don't think I knew how to deal with grief, in the sense that I was young, not naive, but when you're young, you haven't really faced your own mortality.
Life is endless when you're young.
And I remember distinctly at age 19, a young man, when I lived at the funeral home here, dying. And I know his brother real well now and all of that, but I was 19, and I remember that changed me immensely. It just bothered me so much. But up until about age 35, that area, I think I was able to put it behind me, kind of separate myself. I mean, it wasn't that you were bad at what you did, but I just didn't
Bring it
get
home.
yeah, exactly. I mean, when we had children, it seemed like whenever you're having babies and you're also bearing babies, that's really hard. And you know, I know for our staff, it seems like inevitably when somebody has a baby, it seems like we have this run of like different, you know, deaths. But I think what happened at 35 was that all of a sudden somebody my age died. And I know ever since then it's not been the same. And I think what has happened is that I think, one, I understand the mortality, but I think it emotionally affects me and does tear at me. And it's a sort of thing that you can't dwell on it, but you really do realize how finite life really is. And you continually kick yourself because you're like anybody else, because you don't live each day to the fullest. I mean, it's a great thing to say, but we get involved with all this. And so I think as I've gotten older, I'm much better at what I do, because I know that age has given me the ability to have some foresight and confidence to be able to say to somebody, you know, from past experiences, watching other people go through this, you know, whereas at a time earlier on, I would have felt like, oh, maybe I'm forcing somebody, and really it's more of an advice. You know, they can do whatever they want, but this has worked for a lot of people.
What do they want from? What do you think?
Well, I think everybody's different, but I think most people want guidance. And I think the other thing that is unique is that, you know, fortunately, Iowa City is a small enough town. Even as it grows, I mean, I think you get to know people, and you know families, and you've served in families, or you buried grandpa, or, you know, something like that. I'm always joking about, you know, someday I'll probably still be there at 90, and they'll walk in and they'll say, oh, I think he buried great-great-great-great-great-grandpa. But I do think it gives, they look at you for the guidance. But they also, I think, sometimes look for permission to do different things. Something like somebody may say, you know, you might find this really weird, but, you know, nothing's weird anymore. And yet, on the other hand, I think it's, they will confide things in you that maybe they won't confide in everybody else. And then, on the other hand, there are some people that really, fortunately, a very small amount, but that maybe it isn't, it's more of a business sort of thing. It's like, you know.
So it's
a mixture, it's all over.
place.
But it does, I think, you know, the older you are and the more people you know and the families and stuff, if you didn't have some compassion about it, then you wouldn't want to be doing it. But I know it bothers me more. It doesn't bother me, but I know it affects me more deeply than it did when I was 26 years old.
And all your wonderful community activities must be kind of a release that you're facing something else. You're working on the hospice. You're doing library work. You're doing the Riverside Theater work.
I have no hobbies. I mean, it's very odd, but you know,
the community is your hobby.
It is,
yeah,
and
boards,
that
that's
is,
your
you know.
hobby.
And some people say, you know, why do you do all that stuff? And you know what? I really do find it a mental release, because when you're doing and you're dealing with grief every day and you're working with families, this is fun. And the people are all alive. I mean, not that, you know, I'm working with a lot of living people too, but it's a different situation. So it's fun to do things that
where
are fun to do.
grief isn't involved.
Yeah,
You
where
need a
grief
break.
isn't involved.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's like a break from that.
Sure.
You know, I enjoy artwork a lot, and
You collect local artists, is that
yeah,
right?
and you know, and like Marsha Wagman, I just love, and it's like I would, you know, I've taken a couple lessons from her. I don't know.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know if but you know, it's kind of, but I should find time to do that, you know.
Great.
But I love local art, especially. I mean, I love a lot of art, but there's so many great local artists, and so that's really fun, and I love to travel with our kids and things.
Tell me what you've seen. You've been in it like almost 30 years, maybe a little more. What are the biggest changes in the funeral business?
Oh, lots of changes. And I think that's where most families, you know, because in your lifetime, you may go to a number of services or funerals or memorial services, but changes that have occurred is, I think, a lot more personalization. You know, many years ago, it was like you would go to a funeral and it was like It was like there was just the name inserted. Everything seemed the same. You know, it was like the same dialogue and this. But I think now people want to be involved, and they'll want to do something different. For instance, recently we just had a service and it was down on the riverbank, and we actually took the casket and the person down to the riverbank under a white tent and sat 300 there, and it was beautiful. Or we've done services at Kent Park, or people will bring in pictures. We do a lot of videos, not of the funeral, but like, for instance, I met with the family this morning, they brought pictures in and we'll put it into kind of a format. But I think people want just to be more involved. And so it's something that you remember, that it's becoming such a catchphrase to celebrate life. But I mean, I think that's what people want. Now, not every death can be a celebration. When somebody's 18 and it's sudden, but you still want it to represent
that person,
who they are. Yes,
exactly.
So you get a feeling, a sense of, and an essence of that.
And it's for the living. The funerals
Exactly.
are for the living.
Exactly. And so I think people feel more free to do that. More cremation, which is interesting because in the past, it's been like, oh gosh, almost 30 years. There was times that just, it was there, but just not done. Now we do much more cremation. Many times we'll still have a body present for a service, but we'll do a cremation afterwards or a cremation before. Much more ethnicity in the community. We have a much larger Hispanic culture, much larger Asian culture, and then you have all, Laotians, Korean, all different groups, all different belief systems, different funeral rituals. Buddhists.
Speaking of that, I was talking to a couple of Iowa City women, and who said, Judy Hendershot told me that you went beyond what was expected when you helped her out with, speaking of the immigrant family, Tony, who was killed in a car accident down in Kansas City.
Oh, yeah. Actually,
and you went down and got this little young boy, and then
16.
another mother who lost a son young mentioned how wonderful you have such a gift.
I'll tell you, I think the thing that is so interesting is when you say that, I was thinking of this. There was a woman whose son, and she is still living, and she's not that old, but her son, I'll never forget this, was murdered in prison. And to give you an example of how personal things can be, this woman,
her son was murdered in prison.
It's a number of years ago. Sweetest lady. And I'll never forget, I made funeral arrangements with her, and she said to me, she goes, now Michael, the first time we'd ever met, she goes, there's one thing if you could really do for me. She goes, he has not been home for years. He's not been to our house. And I said, okay. And she said, could we, on the way to the cemetery, drive by our house and take him out of the hearse and take him to the backyard? And I said to her, I'll do anything you want. I was more worried about the emotional part of it. But it was so neat because, you know what, a little thing. But I'll never forget, we drive up to the house, the pallbearers, all of these cousins got him, we took him to the backyard, set the casket down, and all said a prayer, and then picked it back up. But
it meant a lot to the mother.
Yeah, it meant a lot. And it's this thing, I think it's things like that. In some ways, how I think a lot of things I've done has shifted is that in a way, people talk about wedding planners, and in a sense, we're event planners. It's like, a wedding, they work months, well, sometimes they're quick, but most of the time it's months and months and months.
Right.
And it's kind of like taking that and consolidating that all down. Now, people do a lot more pre-planning too, or people will write things down or they'll talk about it. Big change, and that's really healthy because it goes to show that, death is a part of life. There are a few people out there that really believe they aren't going to die, but I guarantee them, and they will really, they really believe that. But you know what? It's going to happen.
It's going to happen to all of us. Yes.
And I don't think I have a fear of dying. It's just how I'm going to die. I just don't want it to be too painful. I'm kind of a wimp.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't. But I think you found the right profession. I'm so glad you decided not to chemistry, and you were
chemistry. I would not
oil
be
and
good
water.
At, oil and water would be a good
I
thing.
think you've helped so many people, Michael, that you've hit the right profession.
Well, I think it's not only what I do, but it's a lot of. I think even the things in the community pass over that way. It's Those things are fun to do, but there was ways of, many people in our community serve people in different ways. When I think of hospice.
Yes, and you're involved in hospice.
Hospice, yeah, and it's, you know, in some ways, the caregivers with hospice aren't much different than what I do. It's kind of like when I look at our relationship with hospice, it's more of a continuum of care, you know? When they're working with a patient and somebody dies, and if they've selected us, I go to the house and it's like watching you give your baby from the mom to the grandmother, you know, or something, kind of passing it on to care for. And so I think that's kind of how I view community things too. It's, you know, there's just so many great things out there.
I know. I always ask my guests who, this changing the subject just slightly, but who has had a major influence on your life?
I'd say two people. I probably, in different parts of my life, both women, one my mom and one Vicki. And I think at different times, I think my mom molded me, and I use that word nicely. But you know, there's times I think we look back at our mothers and it's like, oh my God, what did they do?
Yeah.
But you know what? I mean, I am very much my mother. And I look at my hands and I'm my dad, but I have my mother's personality. I look like my mom. I have her anal retentiveness. I'm very perfectionistic. And have too many expectations, and the worst thing is that she worried all the time. Worried. Vicki saved me from that, and I mean that in the most gentle way. In a different way, in that I think Vicki allowed me to be me, and in the sense that it's kind of funny when Vicki's a very strong woman, and my mother was a strong woman, but in a different way, and so I think when the two of them met, it was like, wow, this it was not what my mom expected, you know, and they grew to love each other so much, but it was like a totally different, totally different than what I think my mom envisioned. So I think Vicki was really good because I think she allowed me to really open up and explore other avenues. Like, I mean, we complement each other very well. It's like there's this creative side of me, and Vicki has this other side which tends to be more, she'd probably be much better at chemistry. She's good at, she does the books. I tend to be the one who visualizes things in my mind, and I can see them done. Vic goes, "You've got to be kidding me," and I'll go, "No, that's how it is." But she helps me get it to paper. Yes, to execute it.
So what a nice combination.
It is a compliment, and you know, and I think that's what's been wonderful in our marriage, and both after our marriage and in working together, that we can still do that, and we're very blessed that way. So I'd say the two of them.
And your mother is deceased.
Deceased.
And your father is still living.
Still living, and lives in Cedar Rapids and in Arizona part of the time.
Okay. Now tell me, and you have, I mentioned in the introduction, you have 3 children.
3 children.
And where are they?
Amanda is in Chicago, finishing school, and she goes to Columbia University, and she's in television production. So she can airbrush this as we go on.
Okay.
I don't know about that. Alex is here, and his really name is Michael Alexander, but he goes by Alex, and so he's going to Kirkwood, and he's 22, just turned 22. And then Nicholas is 18 and is going to the University of Colorado in Boulder, and so he's in business.
Oh,
so yeah.
Fun place to visit.
Yes, I haven't. We've only been out there to take him. He was home this last weekend, but yes, it's very nice.
Okay.
Very nice.
If you had any free, it doesn't sound like you have much free time, but if you could make some free time, what would you like to do? What would you like to explore?
Well, you know, sometimes I do have free time, and there are things that I should do, which I think I would like to do, but I love to garden. I mean,
you love
yes,
to
and it's
garden?
been very strange because this has all been within the last 3 or 4 years. I love working outside. I mean, I really never thought I could do that, but I just love that. I love being at home. I like painting. I love home design. If I had another field that I'd love to be in, I mean, I really love architecture. And when I was in junior high, I also would love to draw and draft things. I mean, so I think there's a part of me that would have loved to have been an architect or a draftsman to design things, because I like that a lot. That would be one thing. Maybe do some artwork. I should travel more.
Should. Take the should out of it.
Well, there's this part of me, I'm very thrifty.
Okay.
So what I tend to do is we'll go to Mexico and I'll take the kids because prices are pretty good there. I would love to go to Italy, and I really should do that, but I always find excuses. So, and it's like, I don't know who I'd really want to go with. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like traveling and those sorts of things would be a little something I should do
and
more.
having time to be in your garden.
Yeah, I really enjoy that, which kind of blows me away.
That's awesome.
Especially in the summer and spring.
So, if you are talking to your friends from out of state what do you tell them the best parts of living in Iowa City? Because it sounds like you love this community.
Yeah.
You love to be here. You like to, you know.
Well, I know this is home, and I can tell you how I know that. There was a time, like 12 years ago, where I lived in Chicago for a summer. And I love Chicago. I mean, I love large cities. But, I mean, to the point that I used to be able to drive into Chicago and I'd go down the Eisenhower and I could feel my blood just boil. I mean, it was like pumping. But when I come and I cross the Mississippi River and it's summertime, and it's a blue sky, and there's this corn waving, and I don't even farm, I know I'm home. And Iowa City, I know is home because I know I'm loved. And I mean that I don't mean that in a egotistical way, but I can feel that sense of warmth. Now, sometimes that's wonderful, and sometimes there's a loss of anonymity, which sometimes is very disturbing because you kind of...
Everybody knows you.
Yeah, and that's wonderful, but sometimes it's like you just want to put a baseball cap on and just go like, nobody knows me.
Yes.
But if you had your druthers, I'd rather have it, you know, because you like that. So I can feel like I can be me here, and that's what it's all about.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank
for
you very
Iowa
much.
City.
Thank you for doing this.
My guest on One of a Kind is a well-respected and loved funeral director and community volunteer, Michael Lenzing. Words used to describe my guest are compassionate, generous, enthusiastic, hardworking, thoughtful, and lots of fun. Michael Lenzing is one of a kind.